On the Paper Talk today, we'll be talking about Frankie de Jong, or Frankie de Jong even. Why wouldn't we be? That's the hot topic at the minute. We'll also be talking about Erik ten Hag's wish list. He's got other players, nearly all of them from Ajax, that he's looking at as well. And there have been talks taking place with a couple of defenders. So let's check it out. Jay here for Stretford, Paddock. This is the Paper Talk. As you can see, I'm outside Old Trafford where it's spitting. Get them in, it's spitting. Anyway, we'll crack straight on with it. Loads of transfer stories doing the rounds, which is what we like. We love a good transfer story, don't we? Especially if it leads to an actual signing. Erik ten Hag seems to be getting his wish list in order. Latest reports are that Jurrien Timber and Lisandro Martinez feature on Erik ten Hag's shortlist. This is from Paul Hurst in the Times. He also goes on to say Anthony, Matthijs de Ligt and Frankie de Jong are other candidates. Pau Torres is also admired. Now, there's a little bit more movement on the Pau Torres front, where there's a story in the Independent that says Pau Torres' agents arrive in UK amid Manchester United and Chelsea talk. It goes on to say that new Manchester United manager Erik ten Hag is said to want to sign the international at all costs. We had that story last week. There was a story doing the rounds that Erik ten Hag had said he wanted Pau Torres at all costs, and it seems the Independent have picked up on it as well, and they're saying that the Villarreal defender is a target and that talks have taken place between his representatives and Manchester United's representatives. So we'll have to wait and see what happens on that front. Could be a little bit of movement there. Another defender who I mentioned earlier on the list as well is Jurrien Timber. This is the youngster from Ajax, and it says here, this is according to Mike Verwage. This is the guy who's like the most reliable sort of tier 1 Ajax source. He says Jurrien Timber's representatives have been spotted in London last week at Manchester United's international offices where big transfers are being discussed. Timber is a big favourite of Ten Hag. Much is being done to sign him for Manchester United. Now, it looks like something could be happening there. I think it's the Telegraph that I said Telegraph right because there's 2 A's in it that Mike Virgil writes for, of which I can't pronounce his name. Forgive me. I'm rubbish. But yeah, it's being reported as well. It says that a Dutch in the Telegraph, a Dutch rep from Forza Sports Group, which represents Jurrien Timber, was spotted at Stratton Street in Mayfair, the international office of United. United are going to start moving all their transfer business, I think, to Carrington. I think we have been doing it in Mayfair, and I think that's where it is at the minute. But from what I gather, we've seen other reports saying, I think Paul Hurst mentioned it in his article in the Times, that it's going to be moving it down to or up, I should say, to Carrington. But at the minute, there's still business being done there from Mayfair, and it looks like Timber and possibly Torres could be on the list of players that are arriving at Manchester United. We'll have to wait and see what happens with either of those 2 players. On the Ralf Rangnick front, this broke yesterday. I'm sure you're all aware that Ralf Rangnick will not be staying on at the club as a consultant. He'll be leaving Manchester United altogether. He originally was going to be a consultant. That was the plan when he came in as interim manager. He'd come in as interim, and then he'd stay on. He'd leave at the end of the season and stay on as a consultant. That's not happening anymore. There was a statement put out by the club yesterday that said he'd be leaving. He said I think it was mutual consent. It says here, it said, we would like to thank Ralf Rangnick for his efforts as interim manager over the past 6 months. By mutual agreement, there you go, I told you, Ralf will now focus solely on his role as manager of the Austrian national team, so he won't be staying on as consultant. Now, I don't know whether that's because Erik ten Hag says he doesn't want him. He seemed a bit lukewarm, didn't he, Erik ten Hag, when he was asked about Ralf Rangnick in his first press conference as Manchester United manager. He said that was a club decision. He didn't seem very enthusiastic about it. And I don't know whether he's maybe said, listen, I don't need you, I don't want you, or whatever. Or maybe Ralf Rangnick feels like he can't really do anything here. I don't know what the situation is, but all we do know for a fact is that Ralf Rangnick will not be staying on in any capacity at Manchester United. The whole Ralf Rangnick experiment, I think I called it when I was asked about it yesterday, just seems to have been baffling. It seems to have failed, doesn't it? He came in as interim manager, despite the fact he'd only managed as a coach, as an actual manager in the dugout, I think 2 out of the last 10 years. He was known as more of an administrator or an executive, someone who could oversee the whole club. That was what he was doing at Lokomotiv Moscow. That's what he'd done at Salzburg. That's what he'd done at Leipzig. And yet, that was sort of what you'd expect him to do as a consultant, and yet we're not keeping him on as a consultant. So he brought him in as a manager, an interim basis, even though he hadn't managed a lot over the last decade. And then you think, okay, he has got experience of being a sort of consultant and an overseer and an administrator or whatever, and you're not keeping him on for that. Just really, really strange. A strange decision all round, and I don't think it's one that has worked out in any way, shape or form, even though I did enjoy his press conferences. On Frankie de Jong, because we know that's the sort of big story at the minute, innit? Manchester United are ready to make Frenkie de Jong the highest paid player at Manchester United if they can tempt him from Barcelona. There's a story in the Metro, and I think it originally came from the Star, and it's doing the rounds in other newspapers, that United are willing to make Frenkie de Jong our highest paid player. You've got the likes of Paul Pogba leaving, Edinson Cavani leaving, where it looks like Juan Mata is probably going to leave, Nemanja Matic, quite a few players going off the wage bill. There's also talk that Erik Ten Hag will look to move on the likes of Eric Bailly, Phil Jones, Anthony Martial to increase his transfer budget. But what all those moves do as well is take players off your wage budget. David De Gea, I think, is the highest paid player at the club, and there's talk that if Frenkie de Jong comes in, that his wages will surpass David De Gea. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. I'm always a bit cautious when I hear that players are going to be given massive wage increases, but you can understand it if you're trying to tempt someone from Barcelona, a player that it's not been terrible at Barcelona. I don't think they even want to lose him, to be honest. I think they just open to the idea they may have to lose him to sign other players because they're not the Barcelona of old where they've just had loads of money to do whatever they want. So we'll wait and see what happens on that front. Just one and finally, and that's on James Garner, Nottingham Forest, of course, getting into the Premier League yesterday with a win in the playoff final over Huddersfield. It was Garner's deflected shot that was the goal. That was an own goal, but it was a deflected shot from him. That was the goal that got him there as well. We'll have to wait and see what happens with James Garner. I'd like to see him back at Old Trafford, to be honest with you. I thought he had a very good game. I think he's a very good player. I think we could do with him in our midfield. But he may end up staying at Forest for another year with them in the Premier League. We'll see what happens, but congratulations to him in Nottingham Forest, back in the Premier League after I think it's a 23-year hiatus, shall we say. That's been the Paper Talk anyway. Make sure you are subscribing to the channel. Hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give us a like as well. I've been Jay, outsider, relatively mild Old Trafford now. Thanks for watching.